Hello, and welcome to Monday Madness, the show where we take unorthodox strategies and we make them as successful as possible. This week we are taking a look at the Cuman Rams, and man do I have some beautiful games for you today. The instructions for this week were very easy, but also very loose. Make the Cuman Rams in Feudal Age or Castle Age as successful as you can. Now, let's see how we did. In the first game, I am playing as, you guessed it, the Cumans, because they are the only civ that can make rams in Feudal Age. But it certainly would be interesting if other civs could as well. Imagine Slavs, Celts or say Khmer trying this strategy. The strategy I'm using here in this game, however, is a tatty rush into rams. If you don't know what a tatty rush is, you can click here and go watch the episode where we cover this strategy in detail. The basic idea here is instead of adding the third range, just to add a siege workshop and rams instead. Hopefully my biggest threat will be skirmishers, and against those I can just add in my rams and he can't do anything. Theoretically. My build here is not too pretty, as I'm rather late up to Feudal Age than what is ideal. My opponent already has 7 scouts out at this point, which is a very scary army. And what's even scarier is that he's ignoring my archers and going straight for my economy. But luckily somewhere down the road I learned how to quick wall, and as a result my eco is completely safe from his attack. Meanwhile on the front I've created a fair amount of archers with fletching, and the first ram is on the way. And as soon as my opponent spots it, he immediately sends his scouts home. The ram makes very short work of the enemy tower, and now I pushed him off his gold and wood. But his scouts now arrive and I'm forced away, but after some very fierce and improvised micro where I use a ram as a makeshift wall, I managed to avert the disaster and keep some units alive. Most of his units are now low, and I'm constantly producing archers and rams. And with now 4 rams, 2 villagers and 11 archers with fletching, I go for my best Regni impression and I charge straight at his town center. And here you can witness some very unique spectating bug, where units don't actually ungarrison around the ram, but rather way behind and then magically sort of slide towards the ram. Yeah, I have no idea what's going on here, but either way, he's forced to take the fight to defend his town center, and since his scouts are already low, my archers make very short work of them. Meanwhile his skirmishers are just attacking the rams because they are the closest unit. And he can't garrison his town center anymore because there are 4 rams whacking away at it, and unable to defend his town center and realizing that his whole eco will be exposed, my opponent resigns. As beautiful of a Regni impression as they come. In game number 2, I'm once again playing as the Cumans, and my opponent is playing as the Bulgarians. I'm using the same strategy, but this time my build is a lot better. But also my opponent is going for a Drush FC. But once again my quick walling is a success and my opponent can't find any damage with his Drush. At least, initially. I managed to break through the enemy walls and I start to harass his economy. He puts down a tower in defense, and he even walls underneath it so I can't sit under it with my archers. But a few pesky palisade is not going to stop a ram. My rams are going on a complete rampage on his buildings, and he tries to rebuild some of his buildings and even plugs the hole, but you can't really wall out a ram, that's not really how it works. Meanwhile in Scarfacia, the men-at-arms have now caused death and destruction upon my very fragile economy, and this is essentially where I lose the game. I guess my repairing skills just aren't as good as my quick walling skills. Once I have enough rams, I once again go for his town center, and I manage to take it down and kill a bunch of villagers. But what I hadn't noticed was that he's already snuck outside of his base to take wood elsewhere. He rebuilds his town center and goes up to Castle Age. Even though I killed at least 20 or so villagers, my own economy is in shambles. Currently there are less villagers in the game than minutes played, which is not something you see every day. I eventually find his second base, but he's already got a second TC and knights are on the way. With my crippled economy it takes me ages to replenish my ram numbers, and once I finally have enough to go for a second push, he gets a mangonel out in defense, and that spells GG for me. what really killed me here was not dealing with the men-at-arms. I could have easily sent home a single archer and that would have been the end of that. I also failed in not scouting his second base in time, otherwise I think I would have won this game. My opponent even said in the aftermath that he was really close to resigning once he lost his starting TC. In game number 3, I'm changing things up a bit. This time I want to try my luck with the men-at-arms. My opponent, as the Malians, is going for a Drush FC, which seems to be the meta these days. But I wall out his Drush and I counterattack with my men-at-arms. I don't manage to find any damage on his base, and by the time that my first ram comes out, he's already on the way to Castle Age. I was of course expecting that he would try to go up, but I just didn't have the ram numbers required to stop him in time. Once I finally do have enough rams, he has enough knights to defend, and even though I eventually take down his town center, I lose my whole army and momentum in the process, while he just rebuilds his town center. I feel like I'm too far behind at this point and resign. Looking at the aftermath of that game, our economies were a lot closer than I initially thought, and maybe I called it a bit too early. I almost had enough rest to click up to Castle Age. I could have done that while he was rebuilding his GC, and maybe I could have done something once in Castle Age, but alas, we will never know. Game number 4 is sent to us by Lale, and not to give any spoilers away, but this one is a true masterpiece. Lale is playing against the Franks, and initially he isn't doing anything special. In the start both players are going for scouts, and they trade vills back and forth, and in the end they are pretty even in terms of economy. The big difference is here that Red is trying to go up to Castle Age, and Lale is going more heavy into Feudal Age. We have a very similar situation to last game, where the opponent is going castle, and you try to stop him before he tramples you with knights. Lale is really on a timer here to do damage, as skirms and a few archers really don't stand up all that well against knights. But unlike me, who tries to take down the TC and thus stop the Castle Age from going through, Lale does something differently. He accepts the fact that he won't be able to stop his opponent in time, and instead he attacks everything but the town center. Mainly and most importantly, the houses. Lale is making Red extremely pop-capped here, and Red is only able to make 4 knights. And these knights don't stand up to much, because they don't have upgrades, because Lale has already destroyed the blacksmith. After a small scuffle, the knight gets cleaned up, and Red is trying to panic build houses, but he's losing houses faster than he can make new ones. There are 3 knights in the queue, and there are plenty of resources to make more knights, but Red just can't get them out of the stable. Eventually Lale even takes down another stable to stall the knight production even further, and Red has to call the game, because he simply cannot produce units. This game from Lale is by far the most beautiful game I have seen in a long time. Thank you very much for your contribution, Lale. And now to quickly summarize the human rams strategy. I think that this strategy is very interesting because it opens up a dynamic where all-in feudal pressure is way more viable than normal. The opponent is most likely not used to having to deal with rams in Feudal Age, and you might catch him with his pants down as he's trying to go up to Castle Age. The rams are also quite tricky to deal with if they are protected properly. You could see that every time I tried to take down the town center, my opponent was unable to stop me. Rams, however, are ridiculously expensive, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to keep the feudal pressure up and afford a workshop and rams on top of that. And with this strategy, timing is also very important. You don't necessarily want to make the rams too early, as they can get cleaned up by scouts or men-at-arms, and you don't want to make them too late, so they instead get cleaned up by knights. But all in all, this is a very interesting strategy that I definitely recommend you try out whenever you play the Cumans next. Thank you for watching this week's episode of Monday Madness. Remember to give this video a like if you have enjoyed the content, and hey, why don't you subscribe not to miss out on future videos? If you would like to take part in the next video, you can also join my Discord for a sneak peek at the next week's strategy. Maybe I'll be casting your games next. Bye for now and have an amazing rest of your week.